Hello and welcome to Breaking Bread with Rivaj Maharaj, where nothing is off the table. For today's episode, I wanted to talk on whether NATO actually has a purpose any longer in the world. So without further ado, let's get into it. The North Atlantic Treaty, or NATO as it's commonly referred to, was set up after the Second World War to combat the spread of communism by way of the Warsaw Pact. So you had this military alliance that was set up by Western powers, and they were primarily European powers. However, the Americans were underpinning the security, and they were the guarantors of NATO. And at the time, it made sense because you had two conflicting ideologies. You had communism on the one hand that was spreading across the world, and you had the Western world, which had its capitalist democratic values, and it wanted to check the spread of communism for fear of threat to its own survival. So it makes sense, two different ideologies challenging each other and trying to contain each other. However, 92, you see the Soviet Union disintegrate. 91, 92, you see the dissolution of the Soviet Union. Gorbachev sits down with his American counterparts, and when he's given guarantees that NATO will not expand further eastward, he agrees to Germany reuniting, so East and West Germany reuniting, and he basically brings about the dissolution of the USSR. Now, one would have thought that realistically, the dissolution of the USSR meant that there's no need for NATO. However, for some reason, NATO seems to have managed to stay the course. The problem NATO has is that without a strong, powerful United States to back it up, NATO is effectively a toothless tiger. So let's look at Mark Rutte, for example. This guy is something special. If you look at the way he conducts himself on the world stage, the appeasement towards Donald Trump, it's laughable. It is absolutely laughable.
They're not going to be fighting each other. They've had it. They've had a big fight, like two kids in a schoolyard. They fight like hell. You can't stop them. Let them fight for about 2-3 minutes. Then it's easier to stop them.
And then Daddy has to sometimes use strong language to
you have to use strong language. Every once in a while.
The only other person that blows so much of smoke up Donald Trump's behind is Shehbaz Sharif.
And today, again, I would like to nominate this great president for Nobel Peace Prize, because I genuinely feel that he is the most genuine and most wonderful candidate for Peace Prize, because he has brought not only peace in South Asia, saved millions of people, their lives. And today, here in Sharm el-Sheikh, achieving peace in Gaza is saving millions of lives in the Middle East. Mr. President, I would like to salute you for your exemplary leadership, visionary leadership. And I think that you are the man this world needed most at this point in time. World would always remember you.
So by him behaving this way on the world stage, he's already showing you that NATO needs the Americans. Donald Trump has realized that. He's no fool. He's realized that without the United States, NATO is incapable. And you see it evident in the fact that the Europeans are unable to sit down and agree on just about anything. You've got the EU involved in Ukraine. You've got Hungary, which is saying to them, I don't agree with the your policies on Ukraine. So straight away you've got a problem there. And you've got them throwing money that they don't have into Ukraine. The European nations within NATO are being forced to contribute 5% of their GDP by Donald Trump. They claim they've begun to achieve that. However, Donald Trump's more interested with his part of the world. Europe, the way he sees it currently, with the current regimes in Europe, there's no love lost there. Donald Trump has no love for the regimes that are currently operating largely within Europe. He set up that fund to combat the current European governments whose policies do not align with that of the Trump administration's policies in the United States. He's mentioned it out aloud at Davos that Europe is backward, is moving backward, that Europe's policies are detrimental, and that they need to start looking at the policies that they've enacted within the last 10 years and start walking back on those policies. And I believe that is one of the major reasons why Donald Trump and his administration are pivoting away from Europe. I think they don't see any need to want to underpin a continent that has a value system that is contrary to the one that they see. So this then leaves NATO to fend for itself minus the United States. And the Germans are rearming. You've got a lot of money that's being thrown into the war machine in Europe. However, there's a lot of corruption along the way as well. So you ask yourself, what good is going to come out from having NATO around? Because whilst all these countries within the EU are together, they also have fundamental differences that keep them apart. And that is where their problem comes in, because they cannot seem to ally on just about any policy. Even promoting this idea that the Russians are the evil enemy, you don't even find consensus on that within Europe itself. So you have warmongers in NATO. Mark Rutte needs to keep his job. There's a whole bureaucracy that's grown up around NATO, and there's a whole military industry that's grown up around it, and people are eating off this dynamic. And if it were to shut down today, they would all be without a job. So there is a vested interest to keep NATO around. However, how relevant is it? Do the Russians tremble in their boots when they hear NATO? No, they laugh. It's a joke. Donald Trump has done a lot of harm to NATO in the way in which he's treated them. He's made them look like they're totally subservient and irrelevant on the world stage. So this begging bowl that they're going around with to the United States and trying to, posture and say that they are something, NATO is nothing. There is nothing that the NATO forces can do. Once the Soviet Union collapsed, I think Europe went into a state of apathy. They went into a complacency state where they believed that, they will always reign supreme. And lo and behold, they woke up one day and found that threats are coming in left, right, and center, and from within. And they had basically decapitated their militaries. They had basically decapitated their armies, their infrastructure, only to spend money on useless projects that were going nowhere, whilst all the thieving continued. And now you have a situation where they meant to stand up and do what it is they were set up to do, and they woefully incapacitated in that regard. They have no way of doing it. When NATO talks about its fighter jets and its arms and artillery, it's talking years into the future. The threat is now. but they're talking about defending that threat in the future. So there's a huge disconnect. I honestly do not think that NATO will be around much longer. The Americans pull out. I've said that this Epstein files being released, and if you look at where the brunt of it is being felt, it's being felt here in Europe. So I think the Trump administration is using these files and the information within to help them in a soft power move to destabilize these current regimes within Europe, and then have regimes that are put in place that are along similar lines to the policies and values that the Trump administration is espousing. And until that doesn't happen, you are not going to see active participation by the Americans in European affairs. I think the Americans are fed up. They just want to wash their hands off Europe. You listen to the American populace. They continuously ask, why is it that we have to be paying to bail out the Europeans? They need to be able to do it themselves. Because the Americans feel that at the expense of their populace, money is being sent to Europe, whilst Europe is then promulgating policies of madness. And, it's like they're throwing money down the drain. So they're now having to rein in that cash, and they're looking to invest it within their own country. And, NATO, I think its days are numbered. I do not see a bright future ahead for NATO, because, to be honest, there is no threat that that Europe currently faces that they are actively able to contain just with NATO minus the United States going into action. I think all these generals walking around with all these medals and everything, they just, it's just bluster. Boots on the ground, active, engagement with an enemy, I don't think we have a chance. I think if tomorrow we had to go up against the Chinese, they'd eat us for breakfast. I think if we had to go up against the Russians, that would be a joke. So NATO is going to justify requiring more money. European governments are going to dig deeper and fund this war machine, all the while the European populace suffers. And I think it's getting to the tipping point where the populations within these European countries are now fed up. They're fed up because it's hitting them in their pockets, and they feel that it's something they don't need. So I want to thank you for spending time with us today, and we look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Please remember to like, share and subscribe, as it helps us with the algorithm and it helps our channel to grow.